Hello, this is Mark from thewaybackmeditation.org, and I'm going to talk to you today in this podcast about something called spiritual maturity. It's probably not something you've really thought about much before. Most people are focused on the spiritual journey, attaining enlightenment, different states of consciousness. But this really talks about what that means from an everyday personal point of view and how those greater states can impact and benefit us in everyday life. So let's take a step back. Over many, many lifetimes, your soul develops to become more spiritual. It doesn't happen straight away. But if we're listening to this podcast right now, then the chances are that you are quite spiritual. And that's because your soul has learned over many, many lifetimes and had these experiences, and it started to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is kind of going beyond the self. And that's what a spiritual journey is it takes us potentially from where we are in everyday life to discover much greater states of consciousness and awareness. Of course, in order to do this, we need help. We can get so far on our own, but as I've discussed in other podcasts, there's a process called initiation in which you can access much vaster states of awareness. Nothing to do with the mind, nothing to do with the body, the emotions, your chakras, or anything like that. And these much vaster states of awareness are normally and typically explored within meditation. Now, when there's a teacher working with the spiritual hierarchy, then initiation is possible, and that means that once people are initiated, they have the opportunity to attain enlightenment. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is this isn't some abstract concept. This is a reality, and people have actually done this. And I know people who have started that process, so they've been initiated, which means that they can now go with their awareness into these much vaster spiritual realms. And some of them have even attained enlightenment. And on that journey, there are a number of different steps. And you can equate that to greater states of awareness or greater states of stillness, until eventually you transcend all limits, and that is enlightenment. Enlightenment, from our mind's point of view, is we can kind of describe it in terms of knowing that you're beyond all limits, knowing that you're eternal, knowing that you've never been born, you'll never come to an end, knowing that you have no edges. But these are just words. But the actual state of awareness or state of being is something real. And this is why a meditative journey is one where you have to discover it for yourself. So the role of a teacher or a master is to start that journey for you in terms of initiation, and then give you practical advice and guidance to grow into that state, and then at key points help you to move on to the greater states of consciousness, which would be known as kind of second initiation or third initiation. But again, these are just words. The point really is just to make you aware that there are these much greater states, and that it, provided that there is a enlightened teacher working with the spiritual hierarchy who can reveal these states, then that potential exists for you. But even if you're just starting out and maybe you're exploring breath meditation or mantra or just sitting in stillness, everything I'm talking about here relates directly to where you are as well. Towards the end of this podcast, we're going to do a little exercise as well. So now that we understand that there are different states and that some of these spiritual states can go well beyond personality, then that's pretty cool stuff. That's what most people sit down to meditate, to explore, and to just get the benefits of that stillness, that inner love, and those expansions of just going beyond the mind, beyond the stresses of everyday life. But are they fully realizing their potential, or is a big potential left untapped? Well, I've been doing this meditating for about 35 years, and I realized enlightenment many years ago, and I've been teaching people, and I've revealed the process of initiation to people, and they've found out for themselves the same things, and they've attained enlightenment. And I can say that on the whole, there is a lot of potential that is still untapped, and that's what this podcast is all about, is let's really get the most out of these states. Okay? So we're talking about spiritual maturity. If being initiated and the journey through to enlightenment is kind of spiritual awakening, spiritual growth, spiritual realization, then spiritual maturity is getting the most of that in everyday life down here. Not so much in meditation, but what we do with it outside of meditation. So what does it mean to be spiritually mature? How would we recognize it in our lives? Let's look at a typical meditating person's life. So you sit down in the morning, you might do 20 minutes or an hour or whatever you're doing of meditation in the morning, and whatever stage you're at, you're going inside, you're getting stiller, and you're letting go. If you're initiated or enlightened, then you're going to be going into vast states of awareness. If you're on the breath, just beginning maybe, you're still going to be able to access stillness that is still very profound. That's what you do on the cushion. That's your meditation. Then you get up, you have your breakfast, you go to work, and suddenly you find yourself in everyday life. So whether you're with the kids, with colleagues, time off, on holiday, wherever you are, or at work, stressed, there's going to be pressures. There's going to be things demanding your time, demanding your attention, and we can get caught up in that. That's actually perfectly normal. That's the way the world works. But in those moments, we're back in our mind, we're back in our emotion, we're back in our bodies, and we're back fundamentally in our personality. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what life's all about. But it's quite a contrast from the meditate in the morning, or the meditate you're going to do in the evening, or the long meditate you did last weekend. And it's that contrast that's quite jarring. So spiritual maturity is starting to blur the edges between these two things. So imagine you're at work and you're in a meeting and things are getting a bit stressful. Perhaps there's a problem. You're finding that your environment, whatever it is, whether it's work or family or relationships, it's becoming stressful. You're not comfortable in this situation. Things are being asked of you, or whatever it is. These pressures are all building up, and your mind is noticing, listening to the environment, listening to people talking to you, and it's calculating and it's thinking and da-da-da and da-da-da, and your mind's getting fully involved in everything, and as a result you're getting emotions and everything's running away with you. Okay, that's normal. But you have this awareness that sits behind all of that, and if you're enlightened, it contains everything. So it contains not only the you that's sitting there getting stressed, your mind, your emotions, your body, but it contains all the other people's minds, emotions and bodies, and the environment that they're all in, not just on the physical plane, but on higher dimensions as well. But we're not tapping into that. We're sitting in our mind, we're sitting in our emotions, and we're getting stressed. So how do we be spiritually mature? It's by learning to sit back in that stillness. It's so fundamentally simple. Sit back in that stillness in those moments. So you're still in the room, you're still talking to other people, you're still hearing the information, you're still on a mental level, emotional level, physical level, being engaged by the environment. But you, in other words, your awareness, is that much bigger space. And that space, remember, exists even if you're a breath meditator, even if you have yet to be initiated. It's just, relatively speaking, it's much faster as you go through the spiritual changes to become a more spiritual person, and therefore your potential for spiritual maturity potentially grows. So spiritual maturity is learning how to sit in the stillness of the state in everyday life. It's what I call being in the world but not touched by it. So if you think about it, normal state, there's pressures, there's demands, and you're in your mind, and your mind is reacting, and so therefore you're caught up in the whirlwind. There's no separation, there's no space, so actually you're reacting. Spiritual maturity is sitting back in a greater state of stillness that contains the mind, and observing it and everything else that's going on. And from there, although the mind is still being affected, you can choose your response because you're now becoming consciously awake. And so you can say, well, I can see that I'm getting wound up. I can see that I'm reacting to what that person's saying. But I'm going to stop that. I'm just going to take a moment, calm down, look at it maybe from a compassionate point of view, look at it from a respect point of view, look at it and maybe engage more humility. And suddenly the outcome's going to be different. You're going to make a better decision. You're not going to rise to the bait of someone maybe trying to draw you into an argument or make you feel bad. You're going to sit in that stiller place, that more spiritual space, and you're going to make a good choice. So we can see how spiritual maturity can really actually start to benefit us. And talking about it now, it probably seems so obvious. But when we're caught up in our daily routines, we forget it. And we get to the end of the day and then we sit down and meditate and we let go of everything. We feel great again. And then tomorrow we're going to do it all again. Okay? So Spiritual maturity is starting to bring that stillness into everyday life. Now, why don't people do this? Well, I think one of the things I've seen over the many, many years of being a student and a teacher is what I call abdicating responsibility. So when you come along and you've got a teacher or a master and they're teaching you and they're guiding you, there naturally can be a bit of kind of being in awe of them. And rightfully so, because if they're delivering in terms of spiritual stuff, that really is special, is very rare, and should be respected, rightfully so. But what the problem is when as an individual we go, right, I'm going to abdicate spiritual responsibility to them. I'm going to do the sitting down and meditating bit. They're going to help me at the key stages so I can advance and progress, and that makes perfect sense. But somewhere along the lines we start going, well, I'll also abdicate spiritual decision-making responsibility to them and spiritual problem-solving to them, and anything to do with spirituality I'm just going to ask them because they're the boss, they're the expert. And so we don't really need to do anything because you pick up the phone or you email them or whatever it is, whatever the nature of your relationship is with them, and they answer your questions. And why do they do that? They do that because they care. They do that because they want to help. That's human nature. But in so doing, you're abdicating your responsibility for your own maturing process to another individual. So this is a kind of a wake-up call to say, whoa, hang on a second. Is there a better way? Remember, even the teacher was once a student. They had a day where they sat down and did their first ever meditate. They had meditates where they struggled. They had meditates where they, as a result, realised new things. They didn't get a download of all the information. They weren't taught any more than you are how to do it. So what makes the difference is that they've gone through the process and they've taken it further. And they've got an ability, or they have been given the ability to teach. But they were once like you, and it's really worth remembering that every single human being, well, there is one exception, and that's Jesus, because he was genuinely born different. And so he knew his true nature. He didn't have to go through the process of revelation and discovery. He started with that. And that is because he was made in that way to serve what was needed at that time, and full respect. This is something we maybe talk about in a future podcast, or certainly covered in some of the books that are coming. But basically, with the exception of him, everyone else had to go through the process of learning, revelation, exploring and finding out. And I think that's really humbling and levelling, and should also be inspiring to you, because to think, well, the people that you might maybe look up to and abdicate spiritual responsibility to were once in the same place you are. So that's pretty cool to think, well, if they could do it, maybe we can do it. So let's look at an example, because I think it's always really easy, much easier to learn by example. So there's person X, and they've attained enlightenment, and they found themselves in a situation where they've maybe not sure what to do. They've got maybe work's not great and they're looking at another job. Do they move? Do they stay? Do they go for this other job? There's pros and cons to each. And that decision is starting to stress them out. That decision is starting to make them worry. Should I do this? Should I do that? What are all the impacts? And they're getting kind of bogged down in the decision-making process. So what they do is they call their spiritual teacher. And because they know that their spiritual teacher has this greatest space and stillness and ability to access information from a place of neutrality, they ask, well, should I take this job or not? And a true spiritual master or teacher has the ability to go into stillness and to kind of understand the life plans of others and go, yes, if you do that, it will be for the greater good. And if you that option is better than the other option. And it's lovely to have that ability, and it's on the surface, it's very helpful to be able to be given that information. But again, if you're enlightened, you've got the same level of stillness. So abdicating responsibility doesn't serve you. And so rather than asking the teacher or your mentor, well, what should I do? Spiritual maturity would be to maybe sit down, meditate, get nice and still, and then in that stillness take the question inside and find their own answer, because the person who's got the question has the ability to get the answer. That's spiritual maturity. That's taking responsibility for your own decisions, for your own choices, for your own life plan, for your own karma, for your own life lessons, and all of those things that, I mean, we've discussed this in other podcasts, but all of those things that are part of the joy of the unfolding of life. An even wiser student, if they did approach their teacher about the matter, wouldn't say, well, what should I do? They would ask, how do I develop the ability to get my own answers? In other words, spiritual maturity is striving to develop our abilities rather than just getting information. So I want to just give you a very, very quick exercise, but if you are listening to this and you're driving, fast forward this bit, okay? Please don't close your eyes or do anything like that while driving. But the point of spiritual maturity is that it's something that we bring into everyday life. Whatever stage you're at in your meditation, this applies to you. So I want you to close your eyes now. Take a deep breath. And as you breathe out, just relax. And without visualizing, trying, simply let go more, sitting back on the inside. You may feel a sensation or a sense of just expanding, or maybe you won't. But whatever you're noticing right now, take another deep breath and just have the intention to let go into that bigger space, that bigger stillness. And notice what you notice. Becoming stiller. If you are initiated, just be your state. If you're on the breath meditation or any other form, just be the stillest space. And in a moment, when I say, you'll open your eyes, but I want you to stay in the stillness. Opening your eyes now. And whatever's in front of you, notice it. But let it go. Whatever thoughts that are there, notice it. But just let them be. I'm going to ask you a simple question and just notice what comes without judgment. What do you really need? Whatever comes to mind is whatever comes to mind. But all we're doing here is we're practicing being in the stillness and yet functioning. Now, if you were in a meeting right now and you just closed your eyes and took a few deep breaths, or even just took a few deep breaths, you'd be moving back into that more resourceful, still space. You can hear the difference in my voice. You can notice the difference in yourself. You're still in the world. You still function. But now you are more present in your state. This is what it means to access your state. And obviously this is just a little example. And each time you do this, it may be different. By the way, there's an idea that in order to be spiritually mature, you need to be enlightened. In other words, spiritual maturity is something that is attained through spiritual completion. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Some of the most spiritually mature people I've ever met have not yet even been initiated. And some of the people who are enlightened have yet to fully understand what it means to be spiritually mature. This is good news because it means wherever you are right now is the right place to start practicing being more spiritually mature. You can develop it before initiation. And if you think about it, wherever you are right now, the more you start developing your ability to be in your state in everyday life, then when you get greater states, if you have yet to finish the journey, you'll be able to more benefit from them because you've already set up that desire, that ability, that momentum of accessing your state, whatever it is. And remember that enlightenment is the same for everyone. It has to be. It is oneness. And so whatever state you perceive in your teacher or your master and you look up to, that is the state that you have the potential to realize for yourself. The difference between them and you is they don't look to others. They look inside. So spiritual maturity comes down to your desire to be in the stillness in everyday life. Desire is not enough. Spiritual maturity is developed or grows because you practice it. It's as simple as that. Now you know about it, you can start putting it into practice. And obviously, I could talk more about this and we could ask lots of questions, but that's the point of spiritual maturity, is it's starting to realise that it's not about being spoon-fed all the information or getting all the answers in one go. It's about having that drive and that desire within you to become your own authority. Because then your interactions with your teacher or your master are much richer because you're not coming to them to get information, you're coming to them to learn to be more like them, or even to go beyond that, because they're still learning. Just a thought. I've touched on some subjects in this podcast that may be new to you, so if you want to know more about things like initiation, enlightenment, the spiritual journey, life, karma, soul journeys and things like this, then go back to the website, which is thewaybackmeditation.org. You can put in the search box at the top the word podcast and it will take you to the podcast page where all the different podcasts are. And there's lots of articles, free video tutorials, and in fact an entire how to meditate course that's completely free. You don't even need to sign up for it. You just click on the various links and start your journey there. And there's guidance for complete beginners all the way through to people who are enlightened. Thank you for taking the time. Feel free to share this with others, and I wish you all the best in your spiritual journeys. Peace be with you.